Hello. I suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, which is an anxiety disorder in which people have unwanted and repeated thoughts, feelings, ideas, or behaviors. In other words, my life is like a systemic pattern. But yesterday, I experienced a flaw in my own system. I awoke that morning in my lakeside home, promptly at 6:45 a.m., as I do every morning. Before leaving my bedroom, I made sure to touch the doorknob 3 times. I have to. I need to. On my way downstairs, I made sure not to step on the second to last step. I never touch that step. I just can't. I made my usual breakfast of toast, scrambled eggs, and black coffee. I never eat anything else in the morning, just always those 3. Turning my iPad on, I made sure to check the local news for headlines, like usual. But today, something was missing. I couldn't place my finger on it. Did I forget something? The strange feeling lingered with me all the way to my car. On my way out the front door, I made certain to lock the door, then unlock it, and lock it again. Driving to work, I couldn't help but feel like a part of me was missing. What did I miss? How could I have possibly have missed it? I hoped that the feeling would surpass while at work that day. It didn't. It stayed with me for 12 whole hours. I left the office at around 6:45 p.m. to head back home. About 25 minutes into my commute, I stopped for a red traffic light at the intersection of Marbury and Westway. But as the light turned from red to green, I couldn't help but feel the strange sensation again. The only other person near me was the man driving behind me. He blared his horn for me to get going, but instead of accelerating, I just unrolled my window and motioned for him to go around me. He did. I dreadfully sat there in my car, still stopped at the intersection. Something is seriously wrong. What am I missing here? I made sure to touch everything in my car, hoping that would spark my memory. I touched the dashboard, the leather seats, the emergency brake, and even the roof. It did nothing for me. My hands began to tremble as I slowly pulled away. This isn't right. I don't like this. Arriving home, I pulled my '74 Mustang into the garage. I washed the car every weekday, never on weekends. I only washed the front of the car and the back, never the sides. No matter how dirty they get, I never wash the sides. I simply just can't. But something else seemed to be missing from the daily routine as I washed. No, not again. First the news, then the intersection, now this? Finishing up with the car, I jogged out to the backyard. Only jog, never walk, never run. Opening up the tool shed, I felt yet another thing missing from my pattern. I screamed, "This isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right." I stumbled out of the shed and gazed out at the lake. It always seemed to calm me when my anxiety got out of control. But tonight, all I wanted to do was sleep. I needed to finish this day. The next morning, I awoke at 6:45 a.m., touched the doorknob 3 times, made sure to not step on the second to last step on my way to the kitchen. I prepared toast, scrambled eggs, and black coffee. I turned on my iPad, browsed the local news. It's still missing. I became aggravated. What is it I could possibly be missing? I began to feel nauseous. Hurrying out of the door in a vicious rage, I quickly locked the door, unlocked it, and locked it again. I drove off to work. I tend to get a lot of work done when I'm upset, strangely, so at least I felt some accomplishment when I left the office at 6:45 p.m. I drove fast on my way home. Very fast. What am I missing? I approached the red light at Marbury and Westway. Come on. Think. A man was walking in the middle of the intersection, on his way to the other side. Why can't I remember? The man's head spun as he noticed my Mustang coming straight for him at 85 miles per hour. I noticed him too. A wave of horror crossed my face as I watched him dive to one side. I swerved into that same direction. A loud clunk was made as I crushed the man underneath my vehicle. Oh God. Jumping out of my car, I hesitated on what to do. He lay there writhing in agony, making horrendous guttural wails. I popped open the trunk to my Mustang, lifted the screaming man, and heaved him in. I drove. Upon entering my garage, I made sure to wash the blood off the front and rear of my car. The sides were not necessary. After dragging his broken body out to the backyard, I jogged to the shed. Inside were black garbage bags, cinder blocks, and a hacksaw. After dismembering the man, I was able to fit both the remains and a cinder block into the bag. Dropping him into the lake was all that was left to do. The following morning, I made sure to wake up at 6:45 a.m. and touch my doorknob 3 times before skipping the second to last step on my way to the kitchen. While eating my toast, scrambled eggs, and black coffee, I browsed the local news on my iPad. The top headline, "Hit and Run Serial Killer Strikes Again." I smiled. Back to normal. I just needed to sleep. It wasn't personal, he murmured, focusing intently on his fidgeting hands to avoid my gaze. During the war, to desensitize us, our superiors played harrowing screams of dying men over the speakers in our barracks. Initially, it was deeply unsettling, but over time, I couldn't sleep without it. He yawned, revealing the dark circles under his eyes. "I see," I responded, sitting across the table from the soldier. "And this justifies your actions?" Lifting his gaze briefly, he met my eyes, then quickly averted them. "No, not at all. What I did was inexcusably selfish." He began to pull at his fingers, tugging each knuckle as if removing an unseen pair of gloves. "Then why?" I pressed. Suddenly alert, he straightened in his chair. "Why what?" I stared at him, thinking he might be making a grim jest. "I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. I haven't slept in 3 days. Not since the police took me in. Can you remind me of our topic?" His outburst surprised me, given his typical calm demeanor. Taking a deep breath, I recollected. On June 14th, severed fingers were discovered at a waste sorting facility. They were traced back to you. The police subsequently found several bodies in a makeshift cell near your bed in your basement. And then... Right, he interrupted. "Then they arrested me, and now I'm talking to you." I nodded, urging him on. "So, why did you do it?" Finally, The soldier looked at me intently. "How many knuckles do you have, doctor?" Caught off guard, I tried to recall, but before I could respond, he provided the answer. 28. One for each day. That's almost a full month. I felt a chill run down my spine. The thought of being kept alive for nearly a month, losing a piece of each finger daily, was horrifying. And the inevitable question, what would happen once the fingers were gone? Although we now knew the answer, the victims must have agonized over it daily. The uncertainty must have been tormenting. We'd initially believed the removed fingers were his signature, his trophies. "You tortured them," I whispered. "Each man was like a prescription. Every knuckle, a sleeping pill," he murmured once again, looking at his fingers. "I just needed to sleep. It wasn't personal." I work at a gas station in rural Pennsylvania. It's a boring job, but it's pretty easy, and it pays all right. A few weeks ago, this new guy started. I'll call him Jeremy. Jeremy's weird. He's about 25 or 26, and he hardly speaks, but he's got the creepiest laugh I've ever heard. My boss and I have both noticed this, but it's never been a problem, so there's not much we can do about it. Customers have never complained about him, and he's always done his job fairly well. Up until a few weeks ago, anyway. That's when things started going missing. Employee theft can be a problem at any business that sells consumer goods, and there's only one person working at a time at the gas station. It's a pretty small place. About 2 weeks ago, my boss started noticing that we were short on motor oil. At first, it was a few containers at a time, then entire shelves and boxes from the back room. Pretty soon, entire shipments would be gone the day after we got them, and it would always be right after Jeremy's shifts. My boss has checked the security camera tapes from every single night he worked, but he could never catch him in the act. Jeremy would lock up at closing, then the motor oil would be gone the next day. My boss usually takes the tapes home with him to try and catch Jeremy stealing, but his daughter had a softball game last night, so he asked me to watch the tape for him. He offered to pay me overtime under the table, so obviously, I took that offer. There are 3 cameras, so he gave me 3 different tapes to check. I figured it would be a long night, but I'm trying to save up for vacation, so I really need the money. I took the tapes home, popped them in the old VCR, and sat back. 2 days ago, the last time he worked, Jeremy started at 4 p.m. Everything seemed pretty normal at first. He counted up his drawer, switched off with the girl who was working before him, and waited for a customer. The first person who came in was Miss Templeton, a regular. The timestamp on the video read 4:03. She picked up her cigarettes and her newspaper and paid with a 20. Nothing unusual there. The next customer was some local guy named Ron. He drives a motorcycle, usually comes in every few days. He filled up his tank, got a bag of beef jerky, paid with his credit card, and then left. Next was some guy with a cowboy hat. I'd never seen him before, but we get plenty of strangers passing through, just like at any gas station. He got $40 worth of diesel fuel, paid with a full $100 bill, and went on his way. I sat back inside. The only thing more boring than doing this job is watching someone else do it. My boss's offer was enough to keep me watching though, so I left the tape on. Everything seemed pretty normal. I had a feeling that if Jeremy was stealing motor oil, he knew we were suspicious of him by now. I didn't expect him to be dumb enough to let us catch him on camera. Things stayed boring and routine until about 5 o'clock. At 5:03, Miss Templeton came back in. She must have forgotten something, but she didn't. She bought the same pack of cigarettes as before, and the same newspaper, so she paid with another 20. That's odd, I thought, but then again, she's a little absent-minded. I thought Jeremy should have told her she already got her smokes, but it's not against the rules to sell somebody the same thing twice. That's when Ron came in again. He bought another tank of gas for his motorcycle again, and the same bag of beef jerky. I later checked the outdoor camera because I thought he had another car he wanted to fill up. He paid with his credit card again. No big deal. I figured this was just a weird coincidence. Miss Templeton is forgetful, and Ron probably owns more than one Harley. That's when the guy in the cowboy hat came back in. I felt a chill run down my spine. Don't get diesel. Don't get diesel. I found myself whispering to my empty living room, but he did. He got $40 worth of diesel and paid with another $100 bill. Every move he made was identical to his first visit, right down to the way he scratched his nose before he walked out. Either this guy is rich, owns a lot of trucks, and just moved into town, or something really bizarre was happening. I kept watching. Every customer for the next hour was the same as before, every single one. I was seriously freaked out. And then, at 6:03, Miss Templeton walked back in. She brought her cigarettes and newspaper again, and paid with a 20 again. I thought I was going to lose it. I only watched another half hour before I started fast-forwarding through the rest of it. It was all the same. Every customer would come in at the exact same times, exactly 1 hour apart. Now I know what you're thinking. That sneaky motherfucker Jeremy had messed with the tapes. He had run a loop of his first 4 hours of business over and over. That wasn't the case. There are windows around the cash register area that the camera covers, and I watched the sunlight fade as time ran on. Jeremy's routine didn't loop over. He swept, mopped, restocked, and did all his duties exactly how you would expect. But the same customers kept coming in. I was panicking at this point. Something was seriously wrong with what I was seeing, and I had no explanation for it. I skipped ahead to when he locked up and walked out to his car. He hadn't stolen anything, but I kept watching, just to make sure. I fast-forwarded one last time, to about midnight. At exactly 12:03, out of nowhere, Jeremy's face pops up on camera. I didn't mean he moved his head into view. I mean that 1 second, the store was empty. The next, his face was all I could see. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. I was sure of it. I screamed and fumbled for the remote. By the time I grabbed it, he was gone. Just as soon as he had left, one frame he was there, the next he wasn't. My hands were shaking like crazy, but I popped in another tape. The other indoor camera shows the back area, by the cash register. I would be able to see how he got up to put his face in the camera like that. I skipped ahead to 12:03, but there was nothing. I would have been able to see him standing on a chair or something on this tape, but he wasn't there. I didn't see him enter the store at all after he left. It's like he wasn't really there. He doesn't know the security code, and no alarms are triggered that night after he locked up. What I did see, however, was that at 12:03, the motor oil vanished off the shelf. All of it. Same as Jeremy's face. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. I turned that tape off and went to bed, but I didn't get a wink of sleep. My body is exhausted right now, but my mind is racing. The tape was undoubtedly the creepiest, most disturbing thing I've seen in my life. I work in a few hours. My boss had asked me to bring the tapes back in and let him know what I found. But really, what the hell am I going to say? Jeremy works the night shift directly after me, and the plan is for my boss to come in just before I leave and confront him with me as if I'm supposed to be the one who caught him stealing. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I suppose I have to show my boss the tapes, but I don't want to watch them with him. I never want to see anything like that again. I can't get the image of Jeremy just smiling directly into the camera out of my mind. It was the creepiest look I had ever seen on another human being's face. Anyway, I'm going to try to get some last-minute sleep before I go in and deal with this. I'll let you guys know what happens. Update, 2:49 p.m. Updating from my phone. Apologies in advance for errors. My boss just finished watching the last of the tapes. I told him what to expect, but you really can't prepare someone for something like that. He's scared shitless. I am too. And Jeremy is due to come in at 4. We got a little over an hour to get our shit together, but neither one of us knows what to say to him. Is he just a fucked up guy who likes to steal motor oil and scare the shit out of people? Or is he something else? I don't know if this is crazy, but does anyone think he could have anything to do with the time loop? My boss said he never noticed anything like that in the other tapes, but the way he popped up in this one made me think he knew I was watching. It's like he wanted me to see what he can do, like he was showing off or something. The way he smiled into the camera was like a little kid showing you a sandcastle they just built or something. I don't know. I probably sound crazy. I sure feel the part. I'm going to talk to my boss some more. We have to calm ourselves down and figure out how to handle this. I'll update again tonight, but I have a really bad feeling about how this is going to play out. Update, 4:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update, 5:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone is disconnected. We're calling the police. Update, 6:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update, 7:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update, 8:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update, 10:58 p.m. Holy shit. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. I just got home and saw my previous updates. Things make less sense now than ever. Here's what I can tell you. I went to work. Jeremy never showed up. My boss and I decided to call the police, as you are well aware. When I picked up the phone to call, the sun went out. I shit you not. That's what I thought happened. Apparently, I blacked out for exactly 5 hours, because when I looked at the clock, it was 9:33. I think I got stuck in Jeremy's time loop, and then I snapped out of it exactly at the point I blacked out, if that makes sense. But that's when things got really weird. My boss was right next to me when I blacked out, ready to corroborate my story with the cops. When I came to, the phone was in my hand, but it was dead. Not even a dial tone. My boss was still right there, but he wasn't moving. He was standing up, but frozen. I looked at the clock again, and it wasn't moving. The second hand was stuck on 12. It was 9:33 exactly. The clock on the register computer screen wasn't moving either. My phone was frozen. There was even a customer at the register, waiting for my boss to give him cigarettes. I'm betting that would have been his 5th pack of this day. I got the fuck out of there. Didn't lock up. Didn't turn the lights off. And sorry guys, I didn't grab the security tapes to upload to the internet. Believe me, that was the last thing on my mind. The gas station is on a major highway, and cars were parked all along it. except they weren't parked, they were frozen. The people inside were sitting still as wax figures. I got in my car and prayed that it would start. Thankfully, it did. About halfway home, time started up again. The static from the radio turned into music like it's supposed to be. And from what I could tell by listening to the host talk in between songs, no one noticed the time freeze, or whatever it was. I was the only one. Well, I'm sure Jeremy noticed as well. I still have no clue where he is or what he's doing. I'm hiding in my room and calling the police again in the morning. I don't know if I ever got through to them before, or if I did, whether they took me seriously. I'm scared of my life at this point. I'll update tomorrow if I can. Final update, 10:33 a.m. I finally fell asleep last night around 4. I have no idea how I did it. I guess exhaustion finally got the best of me. This morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my boss. He'd been calling me since about 6. He woke up when time turned back on last night and immediately called the cops. They came by to see what was wrong and he told them everything. The police around here are all small-time guys. They were more concerned about the missing motor oil than anything, but my boss figured he would take it, as long as he had their attention. They decided to go looking for Jeremy. We keep all our employees' applications on file, and since Jeremy just started working here, his was easy to find. They checked the address on it and headed over to his house. You're not going to believe what they found. The address Jeremy listed on the application was an empty lot, or at least now it is. There used to be a house there, but it burned down in 1993. Being a small town, almost everyone remembers that fire. A family of 4 used to live there way back when. Rumor has it that they had an estranged son who they never really talked about, but I can't say for sure if that's true. What I can say is true is that after an insurance investigation, the fire was ruled as an arson. The entire house was soaked in oil and torched with a Molotov cocktail. The entire family was sleeping when it happened. None of them survived. They never caught the guy who did it. Rumor has it that when they tried to contact the estranged son, no one could find him. Anyway, my boss called me and told me this, and I freaked out. Then he asked me to come to the gas station. "What are you, crazy?" I said, but he assured me that the cops were there with him. Then he dropped a bomb. The FBI were also in town, and they were going to talk to me one way or another, so I might as well come in. It was about 7:15, and I wanted to go back to bed, but I figured I wouldn't be able to get sleep much more anyway, so I went down. 4 men in suits greeted me and told me to have a seat. We went over everything 2 or 3 times until they got all the details down. I told them about Jeremy, the security tape, last night at work, everything. Finally, after I finished, one of the agents said, "Oh Christ, we got another one on our hands." Then, they made me sign a bunch of papers saying I wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, so I can't say much more. I might be breaking the law by posting this. So now I'm home. I'm not sure what to do with myself. The agent's words when I told him the story are going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Anyways, I've got to go. I have some errands to run today, and then I have to go into work to pick up some tapes. My boss and I think this new guy Jeremy, he's a complete creep, is stealing motor oil, and I have to watch security footage to see if I can catch him doing it. I have better things to do, but my boss is paying me overtime, under the table, and I'm trying to save up for this vacation so I can really use the money. It should be pretty simple. The oil always goes missing right after his shifts. I figure I'll just watch the tapes, catch him in the act, and that will be that. My cat keeps scratching outside my door. It was late on Sunday evening, and I had to work the next day. I tossed and turned violently on my twin-sized bed. From behind the door, my cat Charlie was scratching like mad to get in. He had been going at it for a good 5 minutes now, and wasn't showing any signs of stopping. Sure, the simple solution would have been to simply let him in and run rampant around my bedroom. I couldn't have that. Besides, he would get all of his messy fur over my expensive bed covers. I did debate a few times getting up and just letting him in, but quickly got back into bed before my feet even touched the ground. From behind the door, Charlie continued scratching. After some time had passed, soft murmuring could be heard coming from outside my door. It was clearly Charlie trying his best to convince me to let him inside. I still wasn't having any of it. The constant scratching on the door from Charlie's paws was beginning to aggravate me, as I'm sure it would anyone else in my situation. Charlie was also beginning to become impatient as he began digging his claws into the carpet outside my room. I wouldn't be surprised if he had done some serious damage to the door. It was already filled to the brim with cuts and marks as it was. I looked over at my alarm clock and saw that it just had gone 2 a.m. This was getting ridiculous, as I had to go to work in just a few hours. "Charlie, cut it out!" I yelled as loud as I could, but the tiredness was evident in my voice. Everything fell silent for a few minutes until I heard Charlie scratching at the door again. He also went back to making that soft murmuring sound. It wasn't even meowing. It was just a soft murmur, kind of like he was purring. He was really going at the door now. He was scratching so much that it was driving me insane. I decided to turn over to my other side, while simultaneously ignoring Charlie's constant scratching of my door. Whilst turning over to my other side, I felt a large lump at the bottom of my bed. I found that odd and leaned over to touch the lump. I felt something soft and furry. A soft purring noise could be heard as I stroked it. That's when something dawned on me. My cat was already in bed with me. Day 1. I keep having nightmares that I'm trapped in a box. These came out of nowhere, and I've never had a recurring dream more than 2 days in a row. Something is always different, but these nightmares are all exactly the same. That's why I'm starting this diary or dream journal. In these dreams, I'm in a box, but it's all kind of blurry. Like when you try throwing a punch in a dream and it moves in slow motion. That's how it has been every single time, 4 nights in a row. I read that having a dream journal helps you lucid dream, so I can slowly manipulate my dreams with practice. If these dreams continue, I should be able to change them eventually. Day 2. Same dream again last night. I feel like the dream is actually becoming a bit clearer. I'm not positive, so I'm not gonna get my hopes up. Day 3. The dreams are definitely becoming clearer. I had no idea this dream journal idea would work at all, much less so quickly. I've been reading up on dreams more, and decided to set an alarm so that I can catch myself waking up in the middle of a REM cycle. This should make it so that my dreams become more lucid. Day 3 continued. Well, I tried setting multiple alarms to keep falling asleep and waking up, but I'm just not really tired today. I'll set an alarm and wake up earlier tomorrow, so I'm sleepier during the day. Day 4. I feel too well rested again. My apartment is starting to feel a little small, ironically. It's 500 square feet, so it's not huge, but it's enough for one person. I decided to get rid of a few extra throw pillows, extra being the key word. It's probably just a side effect of the dreams. Feeling like I'm stuck in a box every night isn't great. It never lasts long, but it's right before I wake up, so it's always still so vivid in my mind. Oh well. Day 5. Major breakthrough. I was finally able to move around while stuck in a box. It's very uncomfortable, and it's definitely made of cardboard, but that's progress. I could even hear a slight white noise in the background. That was all though. I woke up, and for once, didn't want the nightmare to end. I love seeing progress. Looking forward to tomorrow. Day 6. Honestly, who even invented throw pillows? I got rid of all the ones I had. My bed looks so nice and clean, optimal for dreaming. I could smell the cardboard last night. Day 7. Everything is surprisingly clear in the dream now. I could feel the cardboard, and it's pretty solid. There's not much give at all. I don't have any way to get out. I'm too cramped to kick or punch, and I don't have any blade or anything. I think with enough lucid dreaming, I could conjure one. But at that point, would I just be able to dream the box magically opening? Maybe I can give myself laser vision and burn through it. Too much Superman on the brain recently. Day 8. I thought day 7 would mark 1 week, but technically day 8 would be 1 week, right? I'm not sure. I just realized that the dreams became way more lucid when I get rid of things. And honestly, my apartment has been feeling small ever since day 4. My stuff isn't too expensive, so I'll just get rid of a bunch of things. It's kind of funny. Day 9. Nothing different in this dream. I'm still unable to move or do anything. The white noise sounds sort of like an engine or something. It's a low hum. I don't know if realizing more things about it will help me escape, but it can't hurt, right? I'll just focus on everything I can during the dreams. Day 10. Maybe I've been going about this wrong. Maybe I need to force another dream instead of trying to change this one when it happens. Time to focus all my efforts today on one thing: cooking. The mix of smells and tastes will make my day very memorable, so hopefully my dreams will have me in a kitchen. Day 11. I woke up screaming today. I didn't have a different dream, and this time, I felt like I could barely breathe, like the air in the box was running out. I screamed in the dream, then I screamed in real life. Not the wisest tactic when you're running out of air, but it's not like I have much control over these dreams. I can't even control myself sometimes. My apartment was feeling a little stuffy, so I got rid of my couch and some spare blankets and towels. More open air should help. Day 12. The dream is the same every night, but honestly, my real life is starting to feel like a nightmare. I keep feeling like my apartment is getting smaller. I got rid of some more stuff today, just things I don't need. It wore me out, so I'm sleeping early tonight. Day 13. The issue seemed to be my big furniture taking up so much space. My TV stand, bookshelf, and desk. I got rid of them all, and it's not feeling as cramped. But I don't know how my apartment is feeling so small. Nothing different in the dream. I'm constantly trying to escape with no way to. Focusing on making things apparate doesn't work. Day 14. I got rid of my shower curtain today. My floor gets more wet now, but when I was taking showers it was feeling too cramped. Luckily, I have a washer-dryer unit in my closet, so I can reuse my towels as needed. Who would have known those spares would be missed? I smelled a little oil in the dream today. Day 15. I swear, my apartment is still getting smaller. I have no idea how, but with the big furniture items gone, I'm unable to comprehend how I even fit them in here. I'm going to try to sleep on the floor tonight and see if I can't get rid of my bed too. Day 16. The dream was the same, and I slept surprisingly fine. The bed's already gone at the time of writing this. All of the small things I kept on the bookshelf, desk, etc. have been in storage containers, but I haven't really accessed them in a while, and they're taking up space. So, those are going too. Day 17. I was doing a load of laundry today, and when I turned around in my closet, it felt incredibly thin. So I took a hammer to the walls, and now it's an open wardrobe / laundry area. My bedroom's a little bigger thanks to that, but my security deposit is definitely gone. Oops. On a serious note, I think I'm developing, or have already developed, claustrophobia, to a degree that it should be treated by a professional. I've already scheduled a meeting with a psychiatrist. Bringing up this dream seems like a good idea too. It's about time an expert analyzed it. Day 18. I took out my bathroom wall today, right after I woke up. I calmed down after, but it felt like I couldn't control myself. This obviously isn't sustainable, and I'm definitely going to have to pay a lot when I move out. But I really need to worry about my mental health issues first. Future me can figure the finances out. Day 19. I figured that I'd already done plenty of damage already, so a little more wouldn't harm much. I coaxed myself into getting rid of the washer-dryer, fridge, range, and cabinets. It took a lot of straps, pulling, pushing, sliding, and probably damage on my spine that I can't feel since I'm young. But somehow, I did it. I do not recommend trying it yourself, but I bet almost anyone actually could if they wanted to. It was surprisingly painless, or I'm surprisingly strong. I feel great. I have the psychiatrist appointment in 2 days. I wonder if I would have kept my things had it already happened. Day 20. My room is basically one big empty room now. I've been sleeping on the pile of what few clothes I still have. I have this journal, my phone, and the internet. What else does someone these days really need? I know, I should be concerned. But when I woke up this morning, I was feeling so anxious and cramped. It was so bad that now I just feel relaxed. It's literally crazy, I know. But that's what tomorrow's psychiatrist appointment is for. All these changes in my life actually make me appreciative of the dream, since it remains the same. Day 23. It's been a few days since I last wrote. On what would have been day 21, I woke up feeling extremely cramped. I felt like I was almost in the box in my dream. My shower felt like it was almost reachable from where I was sleeping. As a matter of fact, everything in my room felt like I could almost touch it. I had no idea that this was what people with claustrophobia felt like. I went to the psychiatrist, and they were afraid of what would happen the next few days, as the room would keep getting smaller in my head. They weren't sure what I would do when cornered. They suggested a hospital that they know really well, and I've been here since. There was a 48-hour hold before I could have my journal. They give us tasks and activities to do, and honestly, everybody in here seems to have it worse than me. A few people are very depressed, but otherwise normal in social situations, so they're the only ones I really talk to. My room is extremely nice and accommodating. My wall is basically a giant window so I can see things happening outside at all times of day. I've still been having a dream about the box, but my waking hours are much more peaceful now. I turn my journal in every day so that they can read what I'm writing. I didn't actually have to do this, but they asked if I would, and I don't mind. I'm not really crazy in any other way, so it's fine if people read this. Day 27. They asked if I wanted my journal each of the last few days, and I said no, because honestly, there hadn't been an update. The dream has been the same, but the reason I'm writing this now is because the room has been feeling a bit small. I kind of feel like I'm in a fish tank. They let us go outside a lot, but it's not like I can camp out under the stars. I guess this is kind of my plea for help too. Hey doctor, figure something out. Just kidding. Kind of. Day 28. They put stars in my room. Those glow-in-the-dark ones that people have as kids. It's such a sweet gesture. I hope it helps. Day 29. It doesn't help. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I guess the stars had lost their charge from the daylight because my room was dark. It felt incredibly small, almost like a box. Day 37. They wanted to see if my journal could have been the issue, so we went a week without it, which was fine. I'm really just trying anything to get better. Something really bad happened, so they decided I could have my journal back. I punched and slammed my head into the wall repeatedly because I felt like it was closing in. They both bled a lot, and I lost some hair, but I didn't feel like I had a choice. I didn't want to get crushed by the walls. My body sort of just moved on its own. The room feels like a tiny fishbowl during the day, and the box at night. I was having a hard time distinguishing my dreams from reality this past week. I think I figured it out though. The expression, "Pinch me, I must be dreaming," is accurate. Pain is the key. I just wish my hands and head hurt, instead of the box being so uncomfortable. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without any access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming he was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. Scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying that the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said that the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to the table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and He has abandoned us," and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death. The story you're about to hear is one that has been, for the last 70 years, left to wither in the hearts of those few who recall it. Of the 12 of us present that day, only I remain, and my own end is rapidly approaching. I write this tale with shaky hand, solely in order to console myself in these final moments, and I hope anyone who may discover this document will refrain from judgment upon me and my comrades until the end. I distinctly recall sitting in a tent with my fellow soldiers just outside of Berlin, huddling around a shortwave radio and listening to the trials of our nation's greatest foes. They feigned insanity, pled guilty, gave harrowing accounts of every detail and every single crime committed by their hand or under their watch. My favorites, however, were the ones who pled innocent, the ones who said, "I was just following orders." I had to wonder what I would say. Had the war ended with Moscow under the Iron Eagle, what would I say? If asked to justify my actions in war, I believe I know exactly what I would say. And it would be the same as the men being cheered at by the entire Red Army, excluding the 10 of us gathered in the tent. You see, the 2 luckiest of us had already died. It was a quiet village in eastern Germany, December 24th, 1944. We were under orders to seek out any soldiers lying in wait to ambush the main column of the army. Our sergeant, Ivan, took the lead, the rest of us falling in behind him. It was raining heavily, obscuring our vision. A sharp crack jerked me to attention, and I immediately fell to my stomach. I smelled smoke and heard a thump in the dirt a dozen feet ahead of me. The sound of gunfire roared in my ears as we returned fire. We had no idea where the shot had come from, so each among us took our best guess and fired in that direction. We knew we would not hit the shooter, but we had hoped to scare him off. I decided to hold my fire in order to cover my comrades as they reloaded their weapons. When the gunfire stopped, I watched carefully by the nearby houses. A quick movement by a roadside fence caught my eye, and I quickly shot off a couple rounds at the dark mass. At least one of my shots must have landed, because whatever it was fell to the ground, unmoving. By now, my fellow soldiers had finished reloading, and so I ejected my magazine and slid a new one into its place. We were still for some time, waiting for the returning fire. When it never came, Ivan came up to a crouch and quietly walked over to the corpse. He felt the pulse and then returned to us. "Yes, we got him," he said. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a kind of deep sadness and regret. No matter how I pushed, he would not tell me why. We stood and casually walked over to the house where the shooter had come from. Ivan knocked on the door. We waited a moment, and Ivan firmly planted his foot on the floor, rearing to kick the door down. When a shotgun blast blew through the door, Ivan fell to the ground, riddled with buckshot. We returned fire through the door, then swiftly beat it down with the stock of our rifles. Inside, broken glass littered the floor and bullet holes scattered along the walls. On the ground was a young woman, shot fatally 4 times. In her hand, the shotgun that killed Ivan. We had had more than enough of this village. We ransacked the house, throwing over tables and filling our pockets with valuables. When we had finished, we threw gas lamps onto the floor and tossed matches on the pooling liquid. We left the house on fire. It was only once we were outside again that we heard the wailing. By then, the flames had taken hold, and it was too late to re-enter the building. The mother had hidden her babe before turning to fight us, and we hadn't found it before torching the house. The wails continued for just a few minutes before falling silent among the crackling of flames. A man burst from a building down the street and sprinted towards us, screaming in German. Our translator gaped at him, and when we raised our rifles, he held up his hand to stop us. The German man shoved past us and up to the burning building. He hesitated only briefly at the doorway before running through. He didn't come back out. By the time the fire had died, we couldn't see it anymore. The rest of our mission went by in silence. When we doubled back to where we came, we found people standing in the street, staring at us. Some were angry, some were sad, but most had just a blank stare. I still see it in my nightmares. When we passed the house, I stopped. I announced to no one in particular that I had to take a leak. No one believed it, but that didn't matter. I stepped into the shell of the house we had destroyed. There, on the floor, in the bedroom, I saw the skeleton of a man crushed under a wooden beam, a smaller collection of misshapen bones in his arms. In the yard by the fence, I saw a little boy with a toy gun, dressed in the oversized uniform of a German soldier. That night, we all had nightmares. The man, with his wild eyes, told each of us that he would be back for us, one after the other. The next day, we had laughed it off together. We had thrown ourselves into our duties. We had fought hard not to think about the screaming man and the wailing baby. One by one, as the years went by, we died. Here, one of us fell from a tower we were constructing. There, an aggressive form of cancer that suddenly appeared in the brain. Never obvious, but always suspicious to us because we knew. We all knew what was happening. When there were two of us, just Joseph and I, he had come to visit me. When he had knocked, I thought my time had come, but I should have known I would be last. "He's coming for me," Joseph had said. "It is my time now." I would have liked to console him, to assure him it was all a coincidence, but we both knew better. That night, Joseph cried on my shoulder, and I on his. "I am so sorry," he had sobbed. "I didn't know." The next day, he shot himself in his apartment. That was 1 week ago, and now it is my turn. I know he is coming. Every night in my sleep, he gazes into my eyes and smiles. Last night, he began to speak, quietly, so quiet I could not hear any of what he says, other than make out that he is speaking. I don't want to hear what he has to say. I cannot sleep tonight. I will stay up as late as possible, and before I sleep, I will climb to the roof and stand on the edge. I must. I cannot know what he will say. They shot at us. The woman killed Ivan. We couldn't have known about the baby. We were just eliminating the resistance. That's all. We were only following orders. Only following orders. God, I hope I'm just going crazy. You ever had one of those "how in the hell did I get here" moments? I mean those flashes of clarity where you really see your life. You look in the mirror, and you're so far removed from the person you dreamed of being when you were a kid that you're stunned speechless. Mine happened about a year ago, a week or two before Thanksgiving, when I woke up in the hospital. I was incredibly disoriented. Everything seemed unreal and distant, not really happening to me, like I was dreaming or an avatar in a video game. Maybe it was because I had already felt so disconnected. Maybe it was the terrifying reminder of my own morality. But it felt like I was seeing myself with a stranger's eyes. Waves of shame and self-hatred rolled over me in that hospital bed, and I vowed to change my life. I'd made similar resolutions before and failed miserably, but this time was different. This time, the change was nearly effortless. Old habits evaporated, old temptations lost all allure. Peer pressure stopped being an issue, because I just wasn't interested in hanging out with my usual group. When I tried going out with them sober, they bored me to tears. Meanwhile, other relationships in my life were improving. At my son Logan's birthday party, I even overheard my ex-husband telling his mother that I'd finally grown up and stopped causing so much heartache for everyone. When the last children had left and I was cleaning up, my son surprised me with a running hug. He wrapped his arms around me and squeezed me harder than he ever had in his life. "Will you stay?" he whispered. I brushed back his hair with my hand. "Of course. I'll stay as long as you want. You could even spend the night at my place tonight if your dad says it's okay." He sighed happily. "You're so much better than my real mom." Every cell in my body froze. I launched into a speech about how I was his mom, was trying to change, knew I needed to earn his trust back, etc. "Okay," he said lightly, obviously eager to return to his pile of presents. But just before he ran off, he winked at me, like we had an awesome secret. Logan couldn't stay with me that night after all, and honestly, I was kind of relieved. What he'd said had cut me to the core, and for the first time in nearly a year, I desperately wanted to drink. I made it all the way to the front door of my apartment complex before I lost it and started sobbing. I was fumbling in my purse for my keys, trying to see through the glaze of tears, and Sam put his hand on my shoulder. Sam had lived in the apartment next door to mine for years. Before my epiphany, I barely spared him a glance, but after, I found myself joking on cartoon butterflies whenever he passed by. I'd never had to chase a guy before. It's not that I'm Angelina Jolie or anything. It's just that I used to spend an enormous amount of time and money making myself look nothing like myself. You've seen the old me, or one of my countless clones. A golem of silicone and acrylic, spangles and bleach. It's a lot like being a zombie, I suppose. You can barely move for fear that parts of you will fall off. Back on point. I'd been trying to catch Sam's eye for months, and I was terrible at it. I'd chat him up and think I was getting somewhere, but then I'd make a joke or quote a movie, and he'd cringe like I just stabbed him. It was a humiliating way to finally have caught his attention. Hauling like an angry toddler on the front steps, miserably wiping snot on my sleeve as I blubbered confessions for a million sins. Sam listened patiently, only stopping me to suggest we get out of the cold and continue talking in his apartment. He drank me under the table. I'd lost all my tolerance in a year of sobriety, but Sam definitely didn't have a problem. When I got up to get us both another, it was easy to see why. His refrigerator looked like mine used to, boasting the 4 food groups of beer, liquor, takeout, and antique condiments. "Did your roommate move out?" I asked, carrying our beers back from his kitchen. "She used to be a big cook, right? I used to walk by your place around dinner time and drool." "She wasn't my roommate," he said quietly. "She was my wife." My face fell, and the last year flashed by in a sickening instant replay. His total disinterest in me, followed by the pained looks and vanishing act whenever he caught himself flirting back. I'd never bothered to ring check him until my crush hit. "If you'd like to talk about it, I'm interested, but I won't pry if you don't. Up to you." He laughed a little, shaking his head. "It's funny. Emily usually was such a good judge of character, but she was so wrong about you. Sucks that she never got to know you. I think she would have really liked you." He changed the subject, and I excused myself soon after. The next day, curiosity led me to Google his wife. As I read through the results, my eyes widened. Emily had died the night I'd passed out, and it appeared she might have accidentally saved my life. I spoke with a neighbor and confirmed that my guess was right. The EMTs who responded to Sam's 911 call had been the ones who found me. Since they'd been called out for one patient and only had one ambulance, They put me on a board and hung it up on hooks from the ambulance ceiling. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I found that out. My stupid drunk ass had hung there a few feet above the worst moments of Sam's life and the last ones of Emily's. The ultimate third wheel, intruding on something incredibly private and intimate. I laid in my bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining what it must have been like for Emily, staring up at the woman that she had thought was a total waste, knowing that I'd wake up and that she never would. I blushed against my pillow, thinking of how I'd hit on him so soon after her death. I couldn't believe he'd end up comforting me. I swore to never flirt with Sam again, and I kept that promise, even as we became friendlier and wound up with a weekly TV and Chinese food appointment. I didn't mean to get him a Christmas present. I'd considered it, but written it off as getting over the line. Then I went thrifting and saw this pocket knife. It wasn't anything flashy, but something about it just said Sam to me. When I picked it up and examined it, the owner came up behind me. "You've got a nice taste, honey," he said. "They don't make them like that anymore." And I smiled, because that was how I felt about Sam. But when Sam opened the gift, his face went white. Did I tell you about this that night I was so drunk?" he murmured, picking up the knife and turning it in his large fingers. I must have. Sam had inherited one exactly like this from his grandfather. It had gotten lost when he and Emily moved into the building, and he felt awful about it. "Oh crap, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up bad memories." No, this is great. I've been trying to find the one for a long time. Thank you." I think he meant to peck me on the cheek, but it landed on the corner of my mouth, and the next thing I knew, he was kissing me for real. It was amazing for about 10 seconds, and then he sprang off the couch, stammering that he was sorry, and that he'd been overcome. And then it just poured out of him. He told me how much I reminded him of Emily, how being with me was so much like being with her that it broke his heart. "You say things she said. You quote movies she used to quote. Jesus, you wear some of the same clothes. Who put this green shit on Triscuits? Nobody I've ever met except you and her." I didn't reply. I couldn't reply. "I shouldn't have kissed you, my therapist said." He broke off with a disgusting noise, sighing deeply before continuing. "I just don't think I can get over her and do this. The dinners with you, I'm not moving on. I'm just pretending I don't have to." He apologized again, and then he was gone. I stared at the door, like an idiot for a few seconds, letting that sink in. He'd left his present on my coffee table, and I bent to pick it up. "You're so much better than my real mom." Suddenly, pieces were snapping together in my mind, and I kept shaking my head like I couldn't break them apart again. What I was thinking was stupid, crazy, superstitious lunacy. I'd been a few feet away in the ambulance when she'd died. I'd woken up consumed with self-loathing, turning into a new person almost overnight. One with different hobbies, different opinions, different tastes. Even my own son didn't believe I was me. So many things falling into place. My instant, extra strength crush on Sam. My new clothing and hairstyle, so similar to hers in Facebook photos. How I'd suddenly decided to take up cooking and been weirdly good at it. How I'd never put mint jelly on Triscuits before and had no idea why I'd even bought it. How I didn't remember seeing half the movies I was always quoting. I've started seeing a therapist myself. She says I'm trying to distance myself from a past I'm ashamed of. That low self-esteem and my crush on Sam have manifested into me imagining that I'm a person he could love. She thinks maybe I hit my head when I fell. Maybe I have something called depersonalization disorder. I've read countless stories on nosleep about hauntings and possessions. You guys are the experts on banishment rituals, salt and sage and iron. But what do I do if I'm the ghost? What in the hell do I do? Having difficulty staying awake there? Trying to study for some big exam? Finish some last minute assignment that you've put off all weekend, and it's now 3 in the morning and you're absolutely exhausted? Or perhaps you were in a similar state recently and are looking for help on what to do. Well, friend, I have just a prescription to ease your weary mind. All you need to do is win a game. Setting up the game is relatively simple. All you need is an hourglass, a candle, and a marker. Let me make one thing specifically clear. You need an hourglass, not one of those rinky-dink 30-second pieces of shit you get out of a cereal box or a board game. Before playing the game, test your hourglass to make sure it takes an hour or slightly longer to drain out all of the sand from one section to the other. Having it take slightly longer will help, but too long or too short, and you'll run into complications during the game. You must also be completely alone in the room while playing. When you are ready to play, choose any room that can be sealed, simply meaning that all doorways and windows can be closed. Any other form of timekeeping device or alarm must be taken out of the room prior, or the game will not begin. The hourglass will be your only time tracking tool, hence why having an accurate hourglass is important. Anything with an electronic display should also be removed. This includes TVs, cell phones, computer monitors, anything. Leaving them in the room during the game will put you at a massive disadvantage. You may begin the game at 8 p.m. Make sure the room is sealed, drawing the curtains to block any outside light. Then, draw a simplistic hourglass shape on the back of one of your hands. Make sure to remember well which hand it is, since you'll mostly be in the dark for this game. Take the candle and light it. Then, turn off the lights and sit on the floor with 3 previously mentioned objects close together and flip the hourglass so the sand begins to fall into the empty half. The only source of light should be your candle. Now, yell something along the lines of, "I'm not tired and I refuse to go to sleep." Close your eyes to the count of 10 and open them again. You won't be entirely sure, but somewhere in the room, you'll think you can see the shadowy outline of a man. You have now begun the game, and your opponent is none other than the master of sleep himself, the Sandman. Do not provoke him, and do not speak to him either. You've challenged him, and in a way, insulted him about his profession, so he's not in the best moods to say the least. Now comes the game. Your task is to stay awake as long as possible, to a maximum of 8 hours, which will take you to 4 a.m. Every hour, you must flip the hourglass to reset it and keep the game going. Each time you flip the hourglass, you may take the marker and draw a tally mark on your arm. The specifics of which arm you mark will be explained later. And don't think you can just flip the hourglass 8 times really quickly, or just draw 8 lines on your arm. The hour needs to pass in order for the magic to work. If you fail to flip the hourglass before the very last grain of sand falls, or you succumb to sleep, you will lose. During this time, the Sandman will be deploying as many tricks as possible to get you to fall asleep or to give in. See, the bottom half of your hourglass, at any time, represents his power. The more sand in it, the stronger his influence will be. Almost immediately upon starting, you'll begin to feel drowsy. This is merely his presence. If you can't last this long, stop playing immediately. During the first hour, he won't do a lot. He may walk around the room, but he won't touch you or speak to you. Even if you try talking to the being, which is something you should really avoid doing, there will be no response. Also, don't move from your spot to approach him. The closer you get, the more drowsy you'll become. And if you're not near the candle, he may put it out so you can go to sleep. Do not distract yourself during this time. You may easily lose track of time and forget to flip the hourglass on time. The Sandman can also skew your perception of how much time has passed, but he cannot affect the hourglass, so keeping focus on that is your best chance of winning. Side note, if you try to leave the room, you'll find that the doors are locked and the windows reveal nothing but an unyielding darkness as far as you can see. After you pass the first hour, the Sandman may scoff, but will continue to stay in the room. Now, he will begin to pull more from his bag of tricks. He's seen that you're going to be a hard one to put down. The sounds of music boxes and harps may be heard, at first from a distance, but will slowly grow to a level that would be audible and comforting. Resist the urge to close your eyes and listen. Your body will begin to grow weary as you approach hour 2 or 3, depending on how the Sandman is feeling that night. Around this point, he will begin speaking to you in many voices. The soft voice of a young girl, the wise cackling laugh of a grandparent, or perhaps even in the ever-loving recognizable words of your own mother. They will try to congratulate you on surviving for so long with the Sandman, for braving sleepless days and nights to win this game. Whispers of lullabies and nursery rhymes will fill your head, but you know better. Say nothing and ignore the voices. No matter how real they may seem, don't listen to them. Do not go to sleep. If you manage to make it to the halfway point and now have 4 marks on your arm, you'll be nothing less than exhausted, and the Sandman will be nothing less than enraged. He will begin to manipulate your environment even more and start using new tactics to get you to sleep. Instead of trying to lull you to sleep, he will attack you. Hallucinations will occur. You'll see horrifying images of the dead hanging from the ceiling, flashed by a spotlight of unknown origin. The room may start to close in, and then stretch out, and close in again, and stretch back out. A whisper in your ear will turn into shouting in your face from an invisible source. Already weakened and sleep deprived, your remaining energy will be drained in bursts from his terrors. You may have sudden adrenaline rushes, sure, but the Sandman is clever. He'll just time them so you can't just survive to the next hour by simply being anxious. He'll wait until your emotional state has fallen just another level lower, and then bam, 2 rotted feet dangling in front of your face. You can scream all you want. You can beg for him to stop, but this will only use up more of your ability to function. At the 6-hour mark, the hallucinations will shift between horror and comfort, while the Sandman will begin to pick at your brain to find what nightmares cause you to come to a cold sweat many a night. Others will coax you towards a slumber, claiming that you've put up with enough and that you deserve your rest. A warm bed to tuck yourself into, a pillow made from the softest of furs and feathers. The harps and music boxes will start to overload your sense of hearing. In your state, you may welcome the chance to sleep, but snap out of it. Have you been watching the hourglass? Make sure his terrors aren't distracting you. This is why you don't talk to the Sandman, For every tiny detail about yourself you give him, he will use against you here. This is also the part where electronic displays can become a massive problem. They will turn on, regardless of whether they are powered or not, and should you gaze upon their mystifying image for too long, your eyelids will droop, and your body will collapse onto the floor. If you had just turned the screens away, the Sandman might use some muscle and turn it back towards you so you can get a better view. The curtains may open to a brilliant dawn or a clear blue sky, but the only truths in this room are your arm and the hourglass. Unless you have 8 marks, the game is not over. Use any ounce of strength you have to flip that hourglass. Now, an immense chore from the Sandman's influence. Scrawl a line down your arm with the marker, even if it looks like you're taking a knife and slashing your own arm open. During the final hour, the Sandman will begin to address you directly, asking you questions that appear to be simple, but as you are, you can't even remember what 2 + 2 equals. A question is the hardest thing to get out of your head, so don't let it get in. Cover your ears and just watch the hourglass. Keep those eyes open. Don't fall asleep. If the questions get in your head, you'll start to think about it, adding more stress and draining you of what little mental will you have left. It might become hard to breathe, as if something is squeezing your lungs, or the air is dense and hard to take. The Sandman will also get physical, grabbing you and throwing you across the room, leaving you to crawl back to the hourglass before time is up. If you catch a glimpse of his face, it may be enough of a nightmare to haunt you and keep your eyes from shutting. There will be no distinguishable facial features, save 2 bloody eyes, the lids torn from the sockets, endless staring. If you can't take it anymore at any point before the 8th hour is completed, take the hourglass and break it with all your might. Both sections must be broken for the game to end. For your sake, I hope it was made out of glass. Anyone who has made it to the 7th hour mark has never had the strength to successfully break it and either carried on or surrendered to their dreams. You will not receive a reward for ending the game this way, save the mercy of avoiding the Sandman's wrath. If you do not make it to the end of the 8th hour without falling asleep, you will not need to flip the hourglass again. Simply make the 8th mark on your arm and close your eyes. Though you ended the game, you cannot sleep just yet. There's one final task remaining. All you must do is wait for the Sandman to collect the hourglass and say, "You're all grown up now. Sleep when you wish." Open your eyes and find that the hourglass is gone and the candle put out. Now you may collapse in slumber, a 12-hour slumber to be precise. The game puts a heavy strain on your mind and body, so recovery is necessary. But it's the last sleep you'll ever need, or at least to that length, because once you've fully recovered, you will be able to stay awake for an extra hour for each tally on your marked arm. Depending on your normal sleep schedule, this may mean that you only need a small nap, maybe an hour or 2 at most, but for some, you'll never have to lie down again. Sure, you will have the ability to do so if you want to. You can even still dream, but there will never be any weariness following you. Just think of how productive you can be. But it's not all sugar plums and gumdrops. If you mark any tallies on your arm that was not marked by the hourglass, you will instead require more sleep. 1 hour for each tally on the blank arm to be precise. You will require more rest to be able to even function throughout your day. Now these marks can cancel with the ones on your marked arm, but if that's not the case, you may have just gone through all of that suffering only to come out worse than before. And what with your delirious state throughout the game, it's unlikely for the average individual to come out with all their tallies on the marked arm. There are also circumstances for losing. If you fail to flip the hourglass, then the Sandman will gain full power, and with a snap of his fingers, you will collapse to the ground. Regardless of how you fall asleep, be it by failure of the hourglass or succumbing to your own tiredness. You will also sleep for 12 hours to recover. But it will be the worst sleep you will ever have, and the Sandman will make damn sure that that's the case. The worst nightmares will fill your mind, leaving you unable to escape or wake up in a relief-filled cold sweat. All you can do is endure the torture of a dream that feels like years in length, and when you finally come to consciousness the next morning, there you will be, lying on the floor of the room, the marks still on your arm, and blood flowing from where your eyelids once rested. You said you refused to close your eyes and go to sleep. The Sandman has simply granted that wish. When I was in college, I developed a bad habit. No, not alcohol or drugs. Something far tamer than those. I developed the habit of sleeping in class. You see, it seemed as though every class I had fell right after a meal. Breakfast, then comp sci. Lunch, then general biology. Dinner, then statistics. As a result, I tended to drift off as the professors lectured. However, it was an incident that occurred during the last class that finally broke me out of the habit for good. Most of my classes were held in lecture halls at the Science Center, a large multi-storied concrete building with little in the way of decor. From the outside, it looked more like a parking garage or a penitentiary than an educational facility. Inside wasn't much better. A drab, featureless interior, full of the same bland concrete walls and dull fluorescent lighting. Only a small area on the third floor dedicated to offices for the various staff had anything that added color to the place. One evening, after a meal from the student union, I sat in the back row of my statistics course, feeling the tug of my eyelids as my professor droned on down in the front row of the auditorium, and my stomach digested my dinner. You never notice yourself going to sleep unless you're actively fighting it, and I was not one to wage war on myself, so it wasn't long before I was out, chin in my hands, pen dangling from my fingertips, hunched over a notebook full of scribbles. It wasn't unusual for the teacher to notice when someone was snoozing in the middle of a lecture. Half the time it seemed like they didn't care. They're not paid to wake you up after all. If you're not paying attention, they're not going to suffer a pay cut when you flunk out. But some still take a moment to call your name, try to snap you out of it. So when I heard my name being called in the middle of sleep's dark embrace, I quickly snapped to attention and responded, "Yes?" My face got really hot, anticipating the laughter of the other students, but the moment quickly faded as I realized that I was sitting alone in a dark and empty classroom. Looking at my watch, I realized that I'd actually managed to doze off through the entire hour and then some, and it was already past 9 o'clock. Nobody had bothered to wake me, either as a joke or just out of sheer obliviousness. Then I sat there wondering, who called my name? I could still hear the voice in my head, leaving me to wonder if maybe it had been a dream. But then the voice came again. It was low, echoing in the empty room. Clearly not my imagination. The auditorium was dark, but I could still make out much of the interior and the empty seats from the smidgen of yellow light that came in through one of the exits, especially from my position at the top of the back row. "Hello?" I called out into the empty blackness. Several steps down and to my left, something shuffled, moving along the row of seats. I couldn't see it, but from the sound of it, it seemed to be coming in my direction. Instinctively, my heart started racing and I stood up, fumbling in the dark to find my books and to get out of there. My pen fell off the floor and rolled off the edge of the level I was on, and for the briefest moment, I had the insane thought that I needed to go get it. But then the shuffling stopped and the room went quiet, and I stood frozen in my spot, holding my breath and feeling my heart beating in my ears. It felt like several minutes went by standing in that uncanny silence. I swear the only sound seemed to be the faint ticking of my watch. The need to move, to get out of that room was overwhelming. But some lingering thought in the back of my mind wanted to hear whoever it was, whatever it was, and know that I wasn't going crazy. It obliged, finally breaking the silence by calling out my name again. Not with a friendly, curious voice, but one almost devoid of emotion, like a parrot repeating the sounds its owner makes but not knowing what they mean. When I gave no response, it moved with a brushing noise akin to someone crawling on their hands and knees, then called again. I couldn't hold my breath in any longer, and I exhaled raggedly, my entire body shaking with fear. It was enough, and the shuffling came again, almost frenetic, moving to the middle of the aisle and then up the stairs towards where I stood. Finally, my fight or flight response kicked in, and gripping my books tightly under one arm, I dashed for the door at the end of the row, nearly tripping over my own feet. Looking back over my shoulder, the room was still incredibly dark, but there was enough contrast between the shadows and the objects that I could just make out the form of whatever it was coming up and around the edge of the desks. It had the appearance of a human being, but its gait seemed more like that of a crab, walking on both hands and feet with its knees and elbows bent and its back arched at an agonizing looking angle. Something about its head also seemed off, the way it bobbed as the thing scuttled, like it wasn't fully attached. The nightmare realized that I was on the move, and began scrambling up onto the desktops in a beeline straight for me. As it clambered across the row, it started making this awful gibbering sound with an unnerving excitement to it. I can't adequately describe the noise, but it put the fear of God in me. Any faint notion I had that I was being pranked went right out the window when that thing came at me. I hit the wall hard, bruising my shoulder and tumbling down the steps toward the front of the room. Through sheer determination, I managed to keep myself on my feet and tore out of the classroom without looking back. Nobody was in the hall. In fact, nobody seemed to be in that part of the building at all. And why would they be? There weren't any classes that late at night, and all the offices and study areas were 2 stories up. The exit to the building was dark, almost as dark as the lecture hall, but I didn't care. I bolted out into the crisp night air, startling several people who were walking past, and didn't stop running until I made it back to my dormitory, where I hid in my room with the lights on, door locked, and shades drawn until my roommates returned. So, what was it? I don't really know. My strongest suspicion is based on a story that I learned later while talking about the incident with a grad student who had been studying at the school for years. According to her, when the center was first being built, one of the construction workers paving the roof wasn't watching where he was going and stepped on a skylight that happened to be set over a stairwell. He plunged 3 stories, striking the railing several times and landing on his neck, killing him instantly. Whether that story is true or not, I can't be sure. I couldn't find any news articles about construction accidents, and none of the professors I'd asked could verify it. Nobody else had described experiencing anything like it either. I'll tell you though, after that, I didn't visit the science center after dark, and I sure as hell never fell asleep in class again. "12 seems to be the age when kids start putting the heat on their parents about the truth behind Santa. I was certainly no exception to this rule. How were Santa's elves able to make that video game I wanted in their workshop? I thought Nintendo owned Mario. Or how about the ever infamous visiting every house in one night question? Did the jolly man own some kind of time-extending device? Or perhaps the most obvious question of all, how could he have lived this long? A lot of people say he trains apprentices who take his place every few decades. Others claim he's just immortal. As for everything else, magic seemed to be the universal lie everyone agreed on. Whatever the case, I just went with the conclusion that it was my parents' doing. Of course, they deny it and claim ignorance if I confronted them, but it wasn't enough to dissuade my beliefs. So, one Christmas Eve, when I couldn't sleep as these questions danced among my dreams of sugar cereals and new games, I decided to investigate the noise coming from my living room. This time, surely, I would catch my mom and dad in the act of stowing presents under the tree. At least then, they'd let me in on the truth. But as I entered the living room, I saw a man before me that I did not recognize. He was dressed in red and white, with a slightly overweight body, and he wore a stringy fake white beard. His hair, or what remained of it, was graying around the edges of his classic Santa hat, and his eyes were wide with fright as he dropped a present under the tree. Being the intuitive youth I was, I came to one of two conclusions. Either this was a home invader stealing my family's gifts, or the real Santa. I opened my mouth to scream, but the man rushed towards me and covered my mouth. "Shh, shh," he said, putting a finger to his mouth, trying to smile. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I was petrified of him. Then, slowly, he took back his hand and extended it towards me. "It's all right there, little one. You know who I am, right?" I nodded, not shaking his hand back. The trembling man nodded as well, then grabbed an empty sack lying on the floor and gestured to the tree. "Look, see? I bring gifts. Now, run along to bed, or I might have to put you on the naughty list." He started drifting towards the deeper, hearty voice, stereotypically associated with Kris Kringle, but I wasn't fooled. Regardless, I wiped my eyes and began to step back from the living room, trying to create distance between me and the stranger. The man simply watched, wiped his brow, and proceeded to approach the fireplace. I stopped and observed, confused as to how he was going to leave my house. But a blast of green flames erupted from the chimney, and the man fell back to the floor. I couldn't see his face, but I am certain it was twisted in fear like my own. A massive bony hand spawned from the fire, and the arm that followed was draped in a raggedy fur. Then another arm, and then the skull of some wild creature with two large horns followed, nearly as large as the fireplace itself. The bones popped and snapped as it slammed its hands on the ground. The entire monster was engulfed in the flame, yet it did not seem to burn anything in the house. "Eddie," the monster declared, speaking to what I guessed to be the man on the floor. No, Eddie shouted back. "I did my part, see? 10,000 houses, just like you said, right? 10,000. I did my part. And yet, you allowed a human child to see you. You know the rules. Look, I've learned my lesson. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Just let me go, please. I delivered all the..." "Let you go? Did you let that woman go, Eddie? I don't seem to recall you letting her go. This was your second chance, and you've wasted it. What are you going to..." Eddie whispered. I could make out his quaking figure being overshadowed by the creature in the fireplace. The next sound heard was a crunch, with a soft beginning and a snapping finish. I jumped as the sound repeated a few times, finally letting out a shaky breath. I prayed in my head that it wasn't what I thought, but when the creature reared its head towards me, I saw the red and white pants hanging from its mouth as it chewed on Eddie's corpse. Then, I watched it slurp his legs like strands of spaghetti. I covered my eyes and tried to tell myself it wasn't real. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. After a quiet minute, I peeked between my fingers to see the monster staring back at me from the fireplace. The pace of my breathing grew quicker and sharper, my eyes unable to escape from the grasp of those empty sockets. Now, run back to bed, little one, or I might put you on the naughty list. My legs finally found the strength to leave, and I sprinted to my parents' room, diving into the sheets with them. There wasn't a trace of the events of the night before when my family went down to the tree the next morning. There was even a little note next to the empty glass and a half-eaten cookie on the table. Have a Merry Christmas, S. Claus. As much as I tried to take in the warm, comforting atmosphere that came with Christmas Day, I couldn't stop watching the fireplace, terrified that the monster would return. At the least, now I know the truth about Santa Claus. When I was a small child, I was terrified of the dark. I still am, but when I was around 6 years old, I couldn't go a full night without crying out for one of my parents to search beneath my bed or in my closet for whatever monster I thought was waiting to eat me. Even with a nightlight, I would still see dark shapes moving around the corners of the room, or strange faces looking in on me from my bedroom window. My parents would do their best to console me, telling me that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the light. But in my young mind, I was positive that the second I fell asleep, bad things would get me. Most of the time, I would just hide under the blankets until I became tired enough to stop worrying. But every now and then, I would become so panicked that I would run screaming into my parents' room, waking up my brother and sister in the process. After an ordeal like that, there would be no way anyone would be getting a full night's rest. Eventually, after one particularly traumatizing night, my parents had had enough. Unfortunately for them, they understood the futility in arguing with the 6-year-old and knew that they would be unable to convince me to rid myself of childish fears through reason and logic. They had to be clever. It was my mother's idea to stitch together my little bedtime friend. She collected a large assortment of random pieces of fabric and used her sewing machine and created what I would later refer to as Mr. Ickbarr Bigelsteine, or Ick for short. Ick was a sock monster, as my mother called him. He was made to keep me safe while I slept at night by scaring away all the other monsters. He was pretty damn creepy, I had to admit. Honestly, looking back on it all now, I'm still impressed that my mom could think of something so strange and disturbing looking. Ickbarr had the stitched together look of a Frankenstein gremlin, with big white button eyes and floppy cat ears. His little arms and legs were made from a pair of my sister's black and white striped socks, and the half of his face that was green was made up of one of my brother's tall football socks. His head could have been described as bulbous, and for his mouth, my mom attached a piece of white fabric and sewed in a zigzag pattern to shape a wide grin of sharp teeth. I loved him at once. From then on, Ick never left my side, so long as it was after dusk, of course. Ick didn't like the sun, and he would get upset if I tried to bring him to school with me. But that was okay. I only needed him at night to keep the boogeymen away, which was what he was good at. So every night at bedtime, Ick would tell me where the monsters were hiding, and I would place him near that section of my room closest to the spookiness. If there was something in the closet, Ick would block the door. If there was a dark creature scratching at my window, Ick would be pressed up against the glass. If there was a big hairy beast under my bed, then under the bed he went. Sometimes the monsters weren't even in my room. Sometimes they would hide in my dreams, and Ickbarr would have come with me into my nightmares. It was fun bringing Ick into my dream world, as he and I would spend hours fighting off ghouls and demons. The best part was, in my dreams, Ick could talk to me for real. "How much do you love me?" he would ask. "More than anything," I would always tell him. One night, in a dream, after I had lost my first tooth, Ick asked me for a favor. "Can I have your tooth?" I asked him why. "To help me kill the bad things," he said. The next morning at breakfast, my mom asked me where my tooth went. From what she told me, the tooth fairy didn't find it under my pillow. When I told her that I gave it to Ickbarr, she just shrugged and went back to feeding my little sister. From then on, every time I lost a tooth, I would give it to Ick. He would always thank me, of course, and tell me that he loved me. Eventually, though, I ran out of baby teeth, and I was beginning to get a little too old to be still playing with dolls. So Ick just sat there on my bookshelf collecting dust, slowly fading away from my attention. Over time, the nightmares, however, became worse than ever. So bad that they even began to follow me into the waking world, terrorizing every dark corner or rustle in the bushes. After one particularly bad night biking home from a friend's house where I swore a pack of rabid dogs were chasing me, I got home to find something strange waiting for me in my room. There, on my bed, standing fully upright in the soft glow of the moonlight from my window, was Ickbarr. At first, I just thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. They had been all evening, so I tried to flick on the lights. Another flick of the light switch, then another, and another, with no change to the darkness. It was then that I started to get nervous. I backed away slowly towards the door behind me, my eyes never leaving the shape of Ick's silhouette, my hand awkwardly outstretched behind reaching the doorknob. I was just about to get my ass out of there when I heard the door slam itself shut, locking me into blackness. In nothing but shadows and silence, I stood frozen in place, not even breathing. For how long, I can't say, but after what felt like a lifetime of cold fear, I heard the shrill, familiar voice. "You stopped feeding me, so why should I protect you?" "Protect me from what?" "Let me show you." I blinked once, and everything changed. I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was somewhere else. It wasn't hell, but the comparison wasn't far off. It was some sort of forest, a horrible, nightmarish place where partial embryonic abortions hung from the canopy, and the ground swarmed with carnivorous insects. A thick fog wafted through the air, and with it, the stench of rotting meat, while chartreuse lightning flashed across the night sky. In the distance, I could hear the agonizing screams of something not quite human. My head throbbed like it was about to explode, the pain forcing out a river of tears. In my mind, I heard his voice again. "This is what your reality would become without me." I felt earth-shaking footsteps approaching fast. I'm the only one who can stop it. It was behind me now, huge and angry, hot breath across my back. "Bring me what I need," And I will. I woke up before I could turn around. The following day, I raided my parents' closet for my brother's baby teeth, giving them all to Ickbarr. Almost immediately, the night terrors ceased, and I was more or less able to go on about my life as normal. From time to time, I would have to sneak into my little sister's room and snatch what was meant for the tooth fairy, or strangle one of the neighborhood cats and pry out its sharp incisors. Anything to ward off the visions. Anything from a shark tooth necklace to a cavity ridden bicuspid. I also began to notice that it would move about my room whenever I left for any length of time, rearranging my stuff and hanging additional curtains. He was even beginning to look more lifelike somehow. In the right light, his teeth would glisten, and he was warm to the touch. As much as he creeped me out, I couldn't work up the courage to just destroy him, knowing perfectly well where that would leave me. So I went on collecting teeth for Ick throughout all of high school and college. The older I got, the more things I would learn to fear, the more teeth Ick would need to keep me safe. I'm 22 years old now, with a decent job, my own apartment, and a set of dentures. It's been almost a month since Ick's last meal, and the horrors are starting to crowd around me once more. I took a detour through a parking garage after work tonight, found a man fumbling with his car keys. His teeth were stained yellow from a lifetime of cigarettes and coffee. Even still, I had to use a hammer to get out the molars. When I got back to my apartment, he was waiting for me, on the ceiling, in the corner, 2 white eyes, and a mouth of razors. "How much do you love me?" he asks. "More than anything," I reply, taking off my coat. "More than anything in the world."